So on the left, we see the Department for Education in the USA, which has been freshly adorned with the face of Charlie Kirk following his assassination last year. And on the right is a building in Berlin with swastika banners in the 20th century. This paper will argue that the similarities here go beyond red, white, and black vertical banners hung from state buildings. I hope to show you or provide some tools for thinking with the ways in which there is a distinctly religious tenor to the rise of the right in the 21st century. And that gives us the ability as scholars to offer a uniquely informed critique of fascist and proto-fascist ideologies. At the end of this presentation, I hope you will feel a bit more equipped to look at the connections between conspiracy and religion and how this might be affecting the world around us. The primary contribution here is that I'm arguing there's a necessary connection between religious and conspiratorial epistemologies, and that the cryptic quality of all of this, which is extremely useful for fascists, can also be a tool for cunning scholars like yourselves to encode that which is decrypted and to be public servants in a way that only you can. This builds on work which has been done by others, some of whom are in this call. Ward and Boas coined conspirituality in 2011, which was an offering aiming to explain the convergence of New Age spirituality, New World Order style conspiracies, and Age of Aquarius style global consciousness shifts. These rhetorics are usually focused around new religious movements. A good example of that is Theo Wildcroft's recent paper, which looked at the pipeline from yogic entanglements with esotericism to medical suspicion, to conspiracy through COVID-19 rhetoric and beyond. However, I think that we can see even established religious groups are susceptible to conspiratorial thinking. If you look upon this graph, this maps belief in stolen conspiracy theories in 2020. You see that religious groups are much higher than the mean, especially evangelicals and born again, to believe in this conspiracy. For comparison, at the top in gray, I've put frequent Facebook use of multiple times a day, which is commonly understood to be a predictor of conspiratorial thinking. But it seems like religion is a greater indicator of whether you'll be conspiratorial than social media use. Those of you who know David Robinson's work might be familiar with this. QAnon, which proposes this stolen election conspiracy and it's intertangled with it, operates as a new religion which posits Trump as a messianic figure who will wash away a cannibalistic, child-abusing, deep state cabal in an event known the Storm. The American Values Atlas survey of 22,000 adults by PRRI found that Christians were more than twice as likely as other groups to believe in this storm. 54% of Christians surveyed said that they believed it. In 2025, more Americans identified in believers in this conspiracy than identified as atheists. And what's interesting about this is that it's a milieu of Christian and conspiratorial rhetorics. You might recognize these images from January the 6th. This fellow who's on the dais, who's holding the bullhorn, he hasn't got his famous hat on, but this is Jacob Chansley, who's the QAnon shaman. And he offers up this prayer. He offered up this prayer on the dais on January the 6th. And if you read through it, you can see that there are some very recognizably Christian symbols in that prayer. And there are multiple ways in which religious practice can entail the generation of conspiratorial thought. Aspram and Darendal identified that stigmatization of religious knowledges has been, and I quote, exceptionally productive in generating conspiracist motifs, and that postulation of divine interventions in historical processes lay the groundwork for secret group control thinking. This postulates that the positive conspiracy of religion systematically generates the raw materials for conspiratorial thinking, which are repurposed by alternative groups. This means that they're saying that religion is essentially a positive conspiracy, where the secret mobilizing factor is a benevolent God rather than an imicable deep state. But both have similar, ineffable, unreachable, unprovable characteristics. They argue on theoretical grounds that conspirituality can be viewed as a predictable result of structural elements in the cultural milieu and on historical grounds that its roots stretch deep into the history of Western esotericism. They identify that both religions and conspiracy theories are concerned with grand explanatory narratives, and indeed, conspiracy theories hit some familiar notes in terms of religious thinking. Gnosis, soteriological narratives, and revelatory eschatology are all common themes of conspiratorial and religious posturing. So I'm making the case here that religion and conspiracy narratives are doing the same work. They're made of some of the same stuff. They are making identities for believers, and as such are readily available for influence by one another. As a result, I'm keen to deregulate whatever assumptions that might be in the mind of the listener about proper religions and culty religions. It is not the case that proper religions are immune from engagement in the cultic milieu through virtue of their historical depth or institutional stability. Instead, there seems to be a generative vein of conspiratorial thinking that is entirely continuous with religious thought. And I would want to encourage, if you haven't already moving away from prerogative connotations of religion as positive and conspiracy as negative, or cult as negative, and instead look at the commensurability of the two frameworks. A fruitful node for analysis here could be lived religions, which emerge through the anthropological turn, which prioritize the examination of religious practice as it is experienced or enacted, rather than prescribed by institutional authorities. I'm sure that's familiar to all of you. MAGA and Brexit, the topics of this paper, both go a long way in meaning making in people's lives. They are complicated somewhat by the open and earnest use of religious language, like we see in this prayer. It is hard to make the case that MAGA is a religion in all but name when it deploys patently religious language, symbologies, and themes. It's hard to disentangle the political movement from the religious movement of QAnon, especially since one so neatly serves the other. All of this ties in complicated ways with the history of religious language. The founding myth of the American way is worshipped by the religious and secular alike. And when people talk about God and talk about religion and talk about destiny in American rhetoric, this doesn't necessarily mean that they're using it in a religious way. This means it's possible for religious language to be used politically and meaningfully by one who is not religious. This graph shows religious use by different presidents. The bars are religious terms like faith and believe, and the line shows language that explicitly refers to God. This is in the public speaking held in the archives. And linguistic analysis of these speeches found three different plateaus. Early democratic and religious presidents used them about the same. This plateau ceded way to another following Reagan. There was an uptick, and we noticed that there's not that many Democratic presidents in this time, but they used the language a bit less. We also see the humanistic tenor of Ford, Nixon, and Carter, who used a lot of religious language, not a lot of God language, not theistic, ceded way to more consistent and much higher use of most religious and theistic language. This second plateau continued until Trump's first presidency, a notable outlier, using about twice the mean value of religious and deistic languages. So in some ways, the intermingling of religion and politics is as old as time. In other ways, there are new things happening here. Religion is being deployed more than ever, despite society being less univocal than ever on the topic of religion. Why is language being used this way, even when we know that religious deistic language will probably resonate with fewer people than ever? Here is a speech that Trump delivered in South Carolina. You may see some language here, such as demolish, expel, drive out, cast off, throw off. And for mainstream audiences, this could be read as standard political hyperbole. But evangelical listeners might recognize the specific theological valences of evoking spiritual warfare rhetoric. Or white evangelicals, like the kind who are motivated by certain conspiracy theories, will recognize cast out as evoking a demonic exorcism. Trump and other leading Republicans commonly call their Democratic opponents Marxists and communists, following in a rich post-McCarthyist vein of converting the Red Scare into a fear of left-wing politics among conservatives. By drawing these rhetorical links between a demonically controlled deep state and Trump's Democratic opponents, the election debate takes on the valences of moral responsibility, a spiritual battle against evil, the nuances of which are more clear to those who are deeper within the information superstructure of Trump's election rhetoric. If you're reading this as an uninitiated person, you would not see anything satanic in there. But Marxism, communism, Satanism are intermingled in the American conservative imagination. This use of coded language, appearing in one way to the uninitiated and a different way to the other, is a kind of counter-public messaging, which is only visible to people with a certain identity and a corresponding phraseology. Religion is very symbolically rich and phraseologically rich due to its nature of being establishing an in-group, which means there's a certain kind of cultural capital with being a member of the in-group, which illuminates symbolic knowledge functioning as a mechanism for social distinction and group boundary maintenance. The language of demolish, expel, drive out, cast off, throw off can be read as standard hyperbole by the uninitiated, with specific valences for the initiated. This speech clearly adored. It was repeated on May 12th, with a conclusion, a new sentence at the end that says, "The great silent majority is rising like never before." This is a quote from Nixon. He deployed the same phrase. The great silent majority is the white majority as opposed to racial minorities. So there's also racial components here. And you or I or other people who aren't, old enough to remember what Nixon used to say, or aren't moving in those economies of information, might not know that the great silent majority is a racial thing. So through this deployment of cosmological language, MAGA positions itself as a nationalist apocalyptic movement, with Trump representing the last chance to restore America's Christian past and secure a safe future in this spiritual war. This allows Christianity and nationalism to function as a new identity, Christian nationalism, which is not reducible or epiphenomenal to its constituent factors, but operates as a unique and independent ideology. This has a morphological promiscuity where it is not a carrier of the values of either Christianity or nationalism, but allows it to operate as a visible option for a wide array of voters, while carrying the capital of those terms. This can help explain the paradoxical patterns of Hispanic voters supporting a candidate whose primary issue is a disordered and racially charged mass deportation of Hispanics, or of evangelical voters supporting a candidate who is non-pious, who at every opportunity shows a very limited understanding of Christianity. Moving to the third node of fascism. So fascism is hard to define. It's also hard to find a picture for. When you put it into Google Images, you get a loose collection of symbols. It's very hard to point to the fascist movement or regime and highlight what makes it so. German sociologist and critical theorist Max Horkheimer, who was born in the 1880s, died in 1973, argued that fascism's amorphous, shapeless quality is a deliberate feature of the doctrine. And because fascism lacks a coherent systematic ideology, it cannot be pinned down, refuted, or opposed on ideological grounds in the usual way. This makes it more flexible and resilient than ideologies with firm doctrinal commitments, and that's part of its charm, or part of its danger. He identifies that there tends to be a racket structure, a gang-like structure based around loyalty rather than around principles. He identifies a continuity with monopoly capitalism, where economic power becomes concentrated and arbitrary, and this mirrors the arbitrary, non-rational exercise of power by the fascist regime. Might be worth reflecting there on profiteering scenes among oligarchs in the new American regime. Horkheimer also identifies that they critique progressive opposition, and that those who expect fascism to fail because it's irrational or ideologically incoherent are making a category error. Fascism does not need rational coherence to function. Its power comes from the opposite. And this non-cognitive quality shields it from that intellectual critique. And Horkheimer also notices that its ideology is often camouflaged. The vagueness allows it to absorb contradictory impulses, promising different things to different groups, nationalism to some, economic relief to others, solidarity to others still, without being bound to any of those groups. This allows its messaging to be encrypted, obscured, which is why I'm coming to this node when thinking about religion, whose messaging is also obscured. This photo of Donald is a real photo, by the way, by William Coupon. It's not AI generated. I think there is fertile ground to think about why fascists love AI so much, but that belongs in another paper. thinking about cryptic fascism, amorphous cryptic fascism. Maybe you're familiar with crypto fascism, maybe you're not. But in environments in the latter half of the 20th century, when it wasn't acceptable to be fascists, fascists would, in public speaking, use dog whistles to signify allegiance, quorum sense, build an audience, without being cancelled or cast out or obstructed for being a fascist. This list on the screen is from Birmingham City Council's website, which, interestingly enough, has published a guide to help council workers identify extreme right-wing views. These numbers are used by people who want to signal fascism, quorum sense fascism, promote fascism, with plausible deniability. That's a real shopping list of horribleness just there on the screen. And if you're thinking this is far-fetched, I'll illustrate it with an example from my Facebook feed the other day. I don't know about you, but my Facebook feed is serving me more and more algorithmic content from people I don't know as people leave the platform. I was on there trying to buy a shelf. And this stranger made this comment about an AI which was sorting through job applications. And you see that he says that Jewish people should get 109 points from this AI. 109 refers to a white supremacist numeric shorthand for an anti-Semitic claim that Jews have been expelled from 109 different countries. This isn't on Birmingham City Council's list. Google tells me it's fairly specific to one white supremacist group called League of the South. Down in the bottom, you'll see another arrow pointing to a claim that they should actually get 6 million points, a reference to how many Jewish people are approximated to have died in the Shoah, the Holocaust. This conversation might seem to an outsider who doesn't know these numbers, doesn't know to look out for the cryptic qualities, a little problematic, fairly benign. Facebook's full of people who are, good faith, ignorant people. But to an insider or to an initiated scholar, we can recognize that this is actually hate speech, which is flying under the radar. I argue that this insider-outsider dynamic is critical to how the modern right communicate, and religious language operates in the same way. And there's such an a priori alignment between this cryptic quality of religion and conspiratorial fascism that it flourishes. Just another illustration, a reflection on deniability and ambiguity. We know that Donald Trump is a racist, but it's never said out loud. We know that he called white supremacists very fine people when a neo-Nazi drove his car into a crowd of peaceful protesters, killing one person and injuring 35 in Charlottesville. We know his dad, Fred Trump, was arrested in 1927 at a KKK rally. He refused to leave when the cops told him to, and we know it's the same guy because the addresses line up. We know that Trump has established a paramilitary of masked men who abduct people in unmarked cars, with 300,000 people vanished over the past year, 70,000 still in detention, with plans to speed this process up. We know that people like Greg Bavino, who was in authority over that group, uses Nazi symbologies, for example, in how he dresses. That's not his uniform. He had to go and get that made. Just like the banners hanging outside the State Department had to go and get made in 2026. And you can make your own opinions about this, You may think that I'm grasping. This is all subcritical. It's not definitive evidence. And I'm sure that some of it hinges on in-group knowledges that I just don't have. The plausible deniability, the strategic ambiguity is present, and it's twice as popular to believe in this stuff among religious people compared to the me. And that includes people of color and people of faith who are being targeted by this violence are more likely to believe in it compared to the me. So an approach which embraces the complexity in all of this might help us grapple with the religious element. And I argue that there's something happening behind closed doors. Thinking back to the Christian prayer on January 6th, there's a scattergun of symbols. Some are Christian, some are QAnon. The development of these symbols happens behind closed doors. In heterodox online spaces. Here's an example of Donald Trump's Truth Social account, where he is leaning into, he's actively promoting to his followers QAnon beliefs. He does not do that in public. Or whoever manages this account does not do that in public, but it's Donald Trump's official account. And we can make a link back to the amorphous qualities of fascism here. In another video, an AI-generated voice with the aesthetics of a sermon on an old record speaks about Trump's birthday with prophetic resonance. On June 14th, 1946, God looked down on planned paradise and said, I need a caretaker, so he gave us Trump. I, God, need somebody with arms strong enough to rustle the deep state, yet gentle enough to deliver his own grandchild. So God gave us Trump. No evidence of any of this exists. He didn't deliver his grandchildren. But this video was shown at Trump's rallies. So this rhetoric highlights the chaotic scattergun approach to generating new political hooks by finding what works and then running with it. A good example of this is fake news. And I know this is a bit of a tangent from religion, but fake news discourse is 10 years old, and this religious stuff doesn't have the same kind of statistical basis. So if you're old enough, you remember when Trump got into power the first time, there was a significant public debate about disinformation, which mostly came from one small Eastern European town and was highly targeted. For example, this news story of Pope Francis endorsing Trump for president. Maybe you saw it at the time. I saw it at the time. Untrue. And at the time, in 2017, we thought this might dethrone Trump because disinformation shouldn't be allowed. And that just speaks how different the world was back then. The response was to ambiguate the meaning of this phrase. So when the debate was going on, fake news meant things that were false. However, in a news conference touching on news by CNN on this topic of Russian interference, Trump refused to answer questions from CNN saying, "I'm not going to give you a question. You are fake news." This was further illustrated during a press conference, and Trump refused to answer questions from CNN saying, "You are fake news. I don't take questions from you." This is a parasitic reframing of the term. So when people on the left are saying fake news means stuff that's fake, Trump is reframing it to mean fake news is politically disagreeable facts that I don't accept. So instead of it meaning disinformation, to the people in the in-group who are forming these opinions and engaging with these symbologies to spaces, some of which are online, that we're not in, it ceases to mean disinformation and begins to mean partisan news from a source I don't trust, or that doesn't agree with me habitually. If the president or those closest to him want to brand a story as irrelevant and unworthy, they brand it fake news, regardless of whether it's true or not. This changed the meaning in a way that made debate impossible. This graph shows what different people of different political leanings think fake news is. As you can see, people on the left believe it is factually fake stuff. People on the right believe that it is partisan stuff. The graphs at the bottom, the bars at the bottom, shows distrust in mainstream media. So not only does this divide the debate, it makes the debate impossible and causes one group to distrust the forum through which people get information, disabling the debate. Going back to what's happening behind closed doors, this definition, this parasitic redefinition, is similar to how Trump addresses his Christian audience. We see in the Truth Social posts a different rhetoric to in the public posts, the public speeches, opaquely referring to political opponents as evil and satanic, for example. But in public speeches, uses more subdued, cryptic messaging like the enemy and the enemy within when talking about his political opponents. So people's opinions are radicalized and the use of language bifurcated behind closed doors in a way that carries out into the public debate. And it's very hard to cognitively engage with that as an intellectual because it might seem like chaos, it might seem innocent, it might seem like nonsense, but has a different valence to those who are within. And what is this doing to the debate? Well, nothing good. The PRI survey I mentioned earlier found that 40% of Christian nationalists agree that things are so far off track that American patriots should resort to violence to save the country. So this rhetoric is divisive, it's radicalizing, it's rendering debates impossible, and religious folks are particularly susceptible to it. A good justification for that would be that religious language is cryptographic in its way, apologetic in its way, and concerning with these things that are out of grasp, out of touch. That's my point, that there's an epistemological similarity here. Here are three mechanisms of this process. Crypto-religion is a neologism that's meant to help us navigate this. It echoes crypto-fascism, not cryptocurrency. So semantic bifurcation through floating signifiers, cast out, take back, enemy within, that carry conventional political meanings for secular observers while activating invisible second meanings for initiated insiders. The two groups can't even perceive each other's interpretive frameworks, which makes productive debate much harder or impossible. Two would be membership of interpretive communities as political capital. Religious literacy functions as a form of hidden knowledge. To decode this dual-coded messaging, you have to already be embedded in the cultural world of the religious, meaning that the forbidden knowledge dynamic is generative of identity and group cohesion. and strategic ambiguity enabling plausible deniability. So when challenged, politically deployed religious language can retreat into its circular interpretation. Trump's famous misquoting of 2 Corinthians at Liberty University is offered as an example. Critics see incompetence; he doesn't know anything about religion. But evangelical in-groups read it as a confirmation of his desirable bad manners, of his cultural rather than theological posture, which actually makes him more appealing as a cultural defender than not. Anyway, maybe you don't care about America, and I did promise some reflections on Brexit. And we don't tend to hear too much about conspiracy rhetoric here because our political discourse is much healthier. But I'll offer you 3 or 4 minutes on Brexit. There are conspiracies around the European Union, focusing around biblical prophecies of a one world government, Israel being led by a false prophet to make a pact with European nations. Thessalonians tells us that after 3.5 years, the EU president will break a pact and the Lord will return in judgment, and Israel and the yoke of Rome, etc., etc. Again, we have to be pretty deep in the language game for this to be determinable. But we can step away from language and look at architecture. On the left is the Louise Weiss building, the seat of the European Parliament, a metonym for European power. It is the EU's White House or Stormont or Knesset or Big Ben. It's the symbol. And this is tied in imaginations with prophecies of a towering idol, such as the nations that are united and then fall in the Tower of Babel. And on the right is Burgel's 1953 painting of the Tower of Babel. And maybe you think these two bear a resemblance, and you have your cameras off, but maybe, just think to yourself, I agree they resemble each other, or I disagree. It's a crazy conspiracy theory that these 2 buildings look alike, that this building on the left looks like the painting of the Tower of Babel on the right. So hopefully you've made your mind up that you agree that it's real or you disagree that it's a conspiracy theory. In fact, they are designed to look similar. In the decade preceding the construction of the Louise Weiss building, the European Council distributed a leaflet with the motto, Europe, many tongues, one voice, with an illustration of the Tower of Babel from this painting. Babylon, presented biblically as a land without language, might seem like an innocent symbol of frictionless political communication, but premillennialists suggest that this goes against God's actions of destroying the tower in the book of Genesis and is a reconstruction of a de facto rebellion against God. UK-based pundit Alan Franklin states the tower appears to be an attempt to reverse God's judgment on Babel. Spectrum, an Adventist magazine, said the Bible tells us your effort to achieve European unity is doomed to fail. The Seventh-day Adventists in the UK ran a series of events in London following the Brexit referendum to capitalise on the political movement with Brexit-themed evangelical programming. And we could talk a whole bunch about how the Adventists benefited from the religious outcome of the conspiratorial fulfillment of Brexit. But we're running out of time. I think, though, to reflect on this finally, this is a pretty good example of counter-public messaging by the EU. This leaflet fomented an apocalyptic response in a religious audience because it deployed symbols, visual and theological symbols, that were only visible to certain religious audiences. So to finish, I'll offer a summary. Recent I've lost my slides. Recent scholarship identified that religious and conspiracy theories are concerned with grand explanatory narratives, and indeed, conspiracy theories hit familiar notes in terms of religious thinking. This interpretation can be applied to conspiracy movements. They also come from a milieu of information, particularly online information, where a Darwinian process of generation sees all conspiracies subsumed into new conspiracy theories. Both these religion and conspiracy movements have amorphous and porous membership boundaries, which generate senses of identities, require a posture of apologism, defend an internal belief against contrary evidence. And we could say that they are doing the same work in people's lives from a lived religious point of view. In this vein, conspiracy theories are not just taking advantage of the groundwork of our religion or interpenetrating with religion, but they are functioning as religion. They're made from the same stuff. They're cut from the same cloth. This allows for cryptic religious messaging. Not only is religious language particularly susceptible to produce floating signifiers and incommensurable interpretive communities through its deeply theoretical language, but also the very dynamics of religious group formation makes religious audiences more susceptible than the mean for conspiratorial rhetoric. This might explain the success that MAGA has enjoyed in mobilizing along the axis of evangelicals and conspiracists. I've made the case over the past half hour that not only are these links between disinformation, politics, and religion not new, they're essentially intertwined. From a functionalist perspective, religion studies, religion, conspiracy theories is doing the same work, creating and maintaining in-groups, deciding what reality is real and what knowledge is legitimate or illegitimate. I've argued that in order to make sense of new modes of American fascism in particular and religious populism in general, studies in disinformation or religion should integrate. Disinformation studies should integrate with religious studies to adequately theorize the contemporary political landscape, and religious studies must reckon with the extent to which disinformation has become constitutive of religious identity formation, even among established religions. Hopefully, I have helped you think with how perceived wisdom around what religions are susceptible to conspiracy should be destabilized, and offered an evidence base for understanding how religions and conspiracies can both be destabilized through the same processes. That's the end. I can answer questions. I can't put these papers online because they're with publishers, but if you email me, who knows what might happen. And I'll put these slides with references online this afternoon, so you can go to my website to find those.